it became apparent along that journey that my options were never going to be worth anything. I'm hiring you because you know all the things not to do. Your software is actually worth nothing. Cursor is literally in the hundreds of millions in ARR and at risk.
Okay, I want to start with, you grew up in Central Valley, California. Did you always want to get into tech, or was there something pushing you? Did you grew up kind of around this age where like a lot is happening in technology early on?
Early on, so yeah, I didn't think I would work in tech. I actually didn't even think I'd work in business. But no, my first experience with technology was I got in trouble in school. I almost got expelled from school for breaking into our classroom to play Oregon Trail on a Commodore PET. Now, a Commodore PET PC had like 6K memory, and you booted the OS from a cassette tape. And then we were playing text-based Oregon Trail. So me and a buddy had propped open the window to the classroom to where we could get back in, so that after school we could sneak in and be playing on the computer. And so that was my first computer. I did a little bit of programming in BASIC, which nobody knows what BASIC is anymore. But actually found that like I didn't have any desire to code. I was like, man, this is boring, especially with BASIC. So yeah, that was my first experience. But no, I'm old enough that I was editor of the school newspaper. We were using a Mac, the original Mac, and PageMaker to do that. I remember being in college and hearing about this internet thing, and hearing about the Netscape IPO and thinking like, those guys made so much money in one day because they were like my age, or rising age. And so I remember the breaking of the internet. I remember my roommate bringing home the first modem, dial-up modem, 14.4 modem, and we would wait 20 seconds for a page to load. So I go way back, but I was always in and around technology, but didn't think that was what I was going to do.
Yeah, what'd you study in college?
Psychology. And then I got a master's degree in organizational psychology. So I was always interested in social psychology. I didn't want to counsel people. I didn't want to be a therapist, but I was always fascinated with groups and how people make decisions and how we influence each other, and got into social psychology and then organizational psychology. And I tell everybody I thought I was going to be the next Stephen Covey. That was
Okay.
the career path. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was the career path in your mind? Because I mean, that to me is so open-ended. And like there are majors in school, CS majors, where you just go straight into web development or something like that. This seems very open-ended. Did you go into technology right after school or not?
I didn't. And it's really, I was thinking about it, it was really very similar time to today for college kids today, because the world is changing and jobs are going away and new jobs are being created. I wanted to do something with helping organizations perform. So I went to grad school, got the org psych, and then I went into management consulting. So I did about 6 years of management consulting until the .com implosion. And a lot of the consulting we were doing in the late 90s, early 2000s was around big technology implementations. Like everybody was transforming around software. And so I was around tech a lot, but I wasn't the technical guy. I was the people guy. And then in the .com, everybody got laid off. All the consultants got laid off. I was unemployed. I spent 6 months unemployed. In 2002, they said it was the worst job market since the Depression. I enjoyed it. And then an opportunity came up to lead the implementation of a student information system. So because I had been around these big technology implementations, I had kind of a sense of how to lead it, but I didn't know anything about the tech. And so I helped roll that out to 120 locations across the country, and then basically became the product manager for it post implementation for about 3-4 years. It was a brand new product from Oracle. It was a piece of junk. It wasn't done. It didn't work. And so I was trying to make it work, either through customizing it with our own dev team or working a lot with Oracle. I even went to Oracle headquarters and so that was my break into technology and software and product.
So like most people your age, or even a lot younger, just happened to fall into product management, had no clue what it was,
For
just
sure.
kind of fall into it.
And it was not the field that it is today. Like software product management was kind of a new thing. So like when I was in college, I wouldn't have thought I would study that or do that because it didn't really exist
Yeah.
like it does now.
I mean, even when I was in school, I had no clue about it. I thought I wanted to be a designer because that's what we had tracks for, and product management was not talked about at all. And I fell into it as well.
I've talked to a lot of product people that it's like that. It's more of a, hey, I ended up here. I started out as a developer or designer. In my case, I started out as more of a business analyst, evolved into a product manager. But I had
Hmm.
done software implementation work, which truthfully was great. It was great training to be a product manager. If you've implemented packaged software, getting to understand user adoption, eliciting requirements and discovery. So it was good training for that. Had an opportunity to break into commercial software product management with a startup. A guy reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're starting this company. We're building the first student information system in the cloud." So that was
Hmm.
crazy at the time.
Yeah.
Cloud social was a new thing, and so I broke in and led product there. And it was really they hired me because I had domain expertise. And
Yeah.
so at that point, I had to figure out like, well, okay, what does a product manager really do then? Like, yes, I'm helping design the product and what it should do, but like now I was getting introduced into how can product management drive the business, from, positioning, differentiation, pricing, all that stuff.
What company was this called?
This company is called Top School. And so
Top
it was a
School.
start.
Okay, so
Yeah.
did they have any revenue when you started?
About 100K. Yeah, I was employee 12, not counting the dev team. The dev team was in Skopje, Macedonia. And so there were two really interesting things about Top School from a technology perspective. One, it was going to be cloud based, and all student information systems at all schools were still, on-prem. Moving to the cloud was the big idea. So that was really unique about us. And the second thing that was unique about us was the founder who had started the product was enamored with XML. There was this time in the mid 2000s where everyone said XML was now going to be the way we do everything. So he built this product on top of an XML database. It wasn't a relational database. And that seemed like a cool idea. It was only a cool idea until you figured out that it didn't scale and it couldn't perform transactions very well. And we got into revenue and about 10 customers, 10 schools, smaller schools, but 10 schools, and it just wasn't working. So we had to re-architect the product on the fly while still implementing and burning like crazy. We burned so much money.
Your burn was probably really high, but what was your revenue at this point? Was it in the millions or not yet?
At our peak, we got to about 2.5 million in ARR, and about 40 something employees, and had raised $23 million in venture capital. We raised our round in the middle of the financial crisis. We closed in February of 2009, and so that was when I saw how powerful venture capital can be, because we had money and we were hiring when the rest of the world was laying everybody off. I was like, wow, this is the power of venture capital right here. This is awesome. But then and we got to a point where we just couldn't get more traction. What was really hard was the student information system touches every aspect of the school. And so changing your student information system is like doing spinal surgery, hard. So the switching costs are really, really high. So you combine that, is really disruptive to a school's business. Implementations are 6 to 18 months. It's brutal for a startup. But the second piece was a lot of CIOs at schools were not comfortable putting student data into the cloud. So our big differentiator, they didn't trust. Our biggest differentiator was actually for them was like the scariest part about us. So I also learned a lot as a product manager from that experience, because it was a really defined category of software. There were incumbents that had been in place for decades. The feature set was established. And so as a startup, we were constantly playing catch up on Me Too features. Things that were just bread and butter features didn't set us apart at all. So it's having to do all this development. Then we had to re-architect the database. And so we could never catch up. We could never do anything unique. And so you're not unique except for being cloud and subscription. And schools are actually not sure they want that. So
Yeah.
getting product market fit's pretty hard here. And then the switching costs are so high that of course we ran out of money. And so, like I said, we got to about 40 something employees to begin with. And then the death spiral started. At the very end, we were 7, and the CEO laid himself off and put me in charge. So I was interim CEO for about 8 months,
Wow.
and sold the asset to a PE company that was going to put it with something else. They paid $3 million for that business. So the
What
investors,
was revenue at the time?
about 2.5. Yeah. They paid about 1 time's revenue for it. Basically, fire sale. Yeah. Oh, by the way, they also did in tranches. So they put up 500K and then would earn out after that. Basically, it's a fire sale. Like, it was another great lesson is that your software is actually worth nothing.
Yeah.
The code's not worth much. It's the
Yeah.
business is worth everything. So that was the other great lesson I learned from that experience. But then that led to CampusLogic.
Did you make anything on that, or was it because it was a fire sale? Like you were an employee at the bottom of the stack, the pref stack. You're basically trying to return money to investors and try to
That was
make up
another great
anything.
lesson. Yeah, that was another great lesson, going to work in a startup because they gave me options. I had no idea how to value the options. And then I didn't know enough to ask about preferences. And so we had investors who had, 2x liquidation preference. Others had 1x. And yeah, you're right. It became apparent along that journey that my options were never going to be worth anything.
So what was the reason that you stuck around versus try to jump ship, or was it just kind of like I'm sticking around to see where my next thing is?
Yeah, that's a great question. Why did I stick around? I'm a sucker for a lost cause, I guess. I like the battle. Um, I also Someone asked me one time about anytime I've left a company, left a product that I've worked on, how do I feel about it? Well, I always feel like I've left a child. I get personally attached to the product that I work on, and so
Which is good
so
and bad.
it's good and bad, right? Because people can look at it and say, like, well, from a financial perspective, it would have made a lot of sense to bail out of top school sooner. But I look back at it and I'm like, well, I learned so much as we cratered. The lessons I learned while we were cratering about why it didn't work is the reason in my mind why CampusLogic did work. And Greg Scoresby, who's the CEO of CampusLogic, when he hired me, he jokingly said, I'm hiring you because you know all the things not to do. And I was like, yeah, I am your expert on what not to do. But we did things differently at CampusLogic than we did at Top School in so many different ways, from the product strategy to how we organize to culture. And I think the success of CampusLogic, for me, I could draw a straight line back to the failure of Top School.
I want to go back to you were talking about you were playing catch up, these Me Too features. Your differentiator was scary at the time for many people, which is what we're living right now. Many people's differentiator is AI, and many companies, traditional
Yeah,
companies, are
100%.
very hesitant to
Yeah.
not to put anything in AI. And half the time they don't understand how it works or what generative AI means, which is very frustrating on the selling side of things. How do you balance that playing catch up and the Me Too features that are table stakes with other differentiators? How do you wedge that in? How do you weave
Yeah.
those all together to have a good product strategy there?
Yeah. So the first thing is, and one of the things that drew me to CampusLogic was the idea of the solutions we were building there, were outside of the system of record. And so part of it, part of your destiny, so to speak, when it comes to differentiation is set as soon as you decide what you're going to build. Because if you say, like, I'm going to build a better CRM, I'm going to build a better accounting system, like, in my mind, you've already lost. You're already going to be playing the catch up game and the switching cost game. And we did this with CampusLogic because we built 8 products over 8 years, is each time we were actually trying to build something that didn't exist or was significantly different than what existed. So our product strategy right up front was go into a job to be done that nobody's doing, or you're going to come in and do it radically different so that you don't put yourself into that game. Once you're in that game, there's core functionality you have to do, but then I would probably leapfrog to some differentiator, instead of trying to play the Me Too game. Come at it in a different way, come at it with a different pricing model, leapfrog certain things that maybe the incumbents say that you have to do. Change the discussion. Being different is more important than being better, in my mind. And
Yeah.
so that's the high level principle. On an everyday feature to feature level, we all know as product people that that's easy to say and hard to do when you have to close deals, especially if you're in the B2B world. You have to close deals, so sales team's always going to be pounding on you. You're the no guy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO wants to grow, So he doesn't have patience for long-term differentiation games. You got to find quicker wins. That's why good product people are really valuable to a company, because that's a hard job. People don't appreciate how hard it is to prioritize what to do, because you make those decisions daily.
Daily is a
Daily.
reprioritization game. Anytime anyone asks you for a roadmap, the roadmap doesn't exist. It's
You're like,
like, yeah, this is the roadmap today, but tomorrow it could be very different.
yeah, well, and you know my story. I was very anti sharing roadmaps with anybody, even my CEO. And so I tried very hard not to play that game, but I did talk a lot about what's the lighthouse, like where are we headed? And I said, it's like when you're sailing, a sailboat doesn't usually go straight. It tacks back and forth. And so I said, look, the lighthouse is, we're going to ultimately have this thing, and it's going to do these things, but the sequence and how big the tacks are is going to change a lot. And so if I were to tell you what we're going to do next quarter, I'd be lying to you as soon as I said it, because it's just
Yeah.
not true. And so a lot of pride people feel like their job is to plan elaborate roadmaps and show their genius of the roadmap, but they end up being fictional most of the time and setting up expectations that don't get met. Yeah, it's just a trap.
So you talked about Greg, CEO of CampusLogic at the time. How closely did you work with Greg on the roadmap for what you're working on this quarter? Was it super collaborative, or were you pretty distanced?
Yeah, it would depend. We were pretty good partners in general. We were very aligned on the direction of the business, and there was a high level of trust between us. So, a lot of times Greg didn't pay that close attention to what we were doing, but we always had at least one strategic thing a quarter we needed to accomplish. And those were the things that he focused on, and what I always called the boulders. He was more focused on the boulders. The other stuff he didn't worry about too much. Now, I will say too, there were times where, as the CEO, he came to me and said, "We need X, Y, or Z by this date, period." And I said, "Yes, sir. We'll do that."
Yeah.
But those were not that common.
How did you develop that trust? Did Greg just immediately put trust in you, and you saw that and kind of reciprocated that?
No, that trust develops over time. I would say it probably took us a year to get to that level of trust. Um, but we developed that trust by having a lot of conversations. We spent a lot of time together just talking about product direction, just talking about the business, sharing our thoughts, our philosophies, our instincts. Um, and I think getting to know each other. And then I, as a product person, also had to, deliver, show some wins, but it was very rare that we would sit down to talk about the direction of a product or the direction of the company and not have pretty similar ideas of, like, because we had built that connection. I think that building products and building companies is a team sport. Like, I don't believe in the singular genius that is going to do this, the one person unicorn. I don't believe that. I don't believe Steve Jobs built Apple all by himself. Good products and good companies are built through a lot of interactions with people. And so there's a lot of social psychology that goes on in a startup, for good and bad.
We were talking about differentiation and how you prioritize Me Too features versus differentiated features. And something, at least, that has worked really well for us is just where in the market we are trying to attack, like what part of the market we're trying to go grab market share, whether that's small SMB or mid-market or enterprise. We started more on the SMB mid-market size, and we're slowly moving up, getting pulled up rather
Yeah.
by customers. But for you guys at CampusLogic, is there an SMB enterprise mid-market kind of landscape there, or is it because they're all colleges, or is it just kind of the same?
Yeah. No, there are some differences amongst schools. Um, yeah, and for people who may not know, so CampusLogic was selling products that helped the financial aid process at colleges and universities. So all colleges have financial aid because there's federal financial aid and then there's institutional financial aid. So everybody has some flavor of financial aid because you had to pay for school. So what we found was not so much that there was a difference in the market for features or function. It was more of what was their motivation for buying. So, for example, with our core product, we were eliminating all the paper in the process. Larger schools wanted financial aid to run smoother, run faster because they could enroll more students. And we showed data. We had institutions that increased their enrollment by as much as 5%. And when you think about the cost of tuition, that's a ROI calculates up really quickly, right? So they saw it as a way to drive enrollment. So almost like a drive more sales. Community colleges don't care about getting more enrollment. They have all the enrollment that they need, right? They have plenty of students. What they don't have is a lot of resources. So they were wanting our product so that they could do more with less people, right? So they were looking for cost cutting. So it wasn't so much that the product changed, but how we positioned and sold the product changed based upon those two market segments.
So did you start with one market and then move to another, or did you kind of attack both at the same time?
We attacked all of it. I mean, one is vertical software. A lot of times you can't help but go after the whole vertical, and then over time you might see some segmentation start to fall out. But higher education is a small vertical. There are 6,000 schools in the country roughly, and about 4,000 of them are like under 2,000 students, like really small. And a small school like that has a hard time taking technology, right? Like just it's like small mom and pop business almost. And so we did segment those out, but then for the rest of the market, that's not that many logos to go after. So you have to go after everybody. Now, what I love about vertical markets is it is really helpful for getting a really clear ICP and developing a GTM that's very targeted around that ICP. And you can establish yourself as a category leader and dominate. If you're in a vertical market, you should be able to get pretty high percentage of the market to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was our strategy. That vertical market led to some other things. Like one, we had a real focus on average revenue per account. So the product team had to think about not so much about differentiating the product to serve different ICPs within the market, but more of like, okay, now we're into an ICP. How do we get them to buy more from us? How do we serve more? And so we really had to organize our product efforts around product expansion, cross-sell product, that kind of thing.
How long did you have your main product before you broke out into your second product?
Less than a year. Like we went and part of that was when I got to CampusLogic, the first product had just gone live with 2 or 3 customers after some failed attempts. The first 2 versions of the product didn't work at all. They had to go back and redo it. So the third version actually got some customers. There were 2 customers live when I came on board, and then the second product launched like 6 months after I was there, but they had already kind of kicked that off, and they built it with a customer. So it was actually an idea that the customer had, and the core product wasn't ready. And so Greg said, well, how about, you work with us on this other little product, this other problem that you have while we finish this. And luckily that customer is Western Governors University. They were willing to wait and were excited to talk about the other product. So those first 2 kind of came out boom, boom. But then that set an expectation that was possible. So Greg and I, one of the strategic conversations we always talked about was, what's product X? Meaning, like, what's the product we're going to release next year? And so we always had these set of candidates for product X, didn't know what they were. And so what that meant was, as product people, we had to get really close to our buyer and figure out what their other pain points, other needs were, so that we could find another opportunity. People go down different paths. We went down the path of discrete products. So it was a cross-sell motion as opposed to a usage model or a tier-based system with expansion. We didn't have a lot of expansion. We had cross-sell. And so that affects how you organize the product team. That affects how you organize your sales team. And then, we didn't land with every product, but in the beginning, that was the idea, was each product should be able to land on its own. And so we did have some differences in which product the customer bought first.
Yeah. How does that work in your go-to-market motion? Maybe you need to back up and tell me what was the general go-to-market motion for these. I mean, only 6,000 possible customers.
Well, that's the thing too. So like when you think about your sales team, so the sales team gets pretty close to the customer too. We
because they're just trying to develop a relationship with them.
They have 200 accounts, right? Like a rep at our peak, a rep had 200 accounts, 200 schools that were in the, above 2,000 student range in their territory. I mean, you can call all 200 in a week.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the go-to-market motion was, yeah, pretty targeted. We tried to have kind of an account-based strategy, and then we also had hunter farmers. So we had the people whose job it was to go sell and land an account, and then we had an account management team that was to come along later and cross sell. Now, ideally, you sell them everything up front. It was rare that we sold them everything we had up. I can only think of a handful of schools that did that. University of Utah did that. They bought everything all at once.
Was the
But
buyer the
most didn't.
same for all the products?
Yeah, that was another part of the strategy. Is a lot of times product people think, well, I'll build something for this buyer within the account within the company, and maybe this buyer within the company. And I had seen early on in my career that colleges and universities are actually like a bunch of fiefdoms. And because you sold something to the registrar's office, gives you no leverage to sell something into the financial aid office. Like they don't care. They don't talk to each other's different budgets. They might as well be different companies. So a lot of people in higher ed have tried that model. They're like, oh, well, we'll sell them this learning management system. And in fact, Blackboard did this. We have a learning management system, and then they went out and bought a payments company. Well, those have nothing to do with each other. And so we wanted an efficient GTM. And so we wanted to sell to the same buyer. Now that was a decision that changed. When Greg first hired me, the strategy was, let's figure out where there are gaps in the student information system that I just built, and let's fill in those gaps across the life cycle, which would have meant we'd have different buyers. And that was the original strategy. And then after I'd been there about a year, we said, you know what, we're getting such good traction with these first two products with the financial aid office, and maybe we should just focus there. And at the same time, Greg came up with a marketing tagline, "We make financial aid awesome." And I was like, yeah, that's the rallying cry. Let's make financial aid awesome. Let's go deep on financial aid and only sell to one buyer. So as the director of financial aid, who reports to the head of enrollment, typically the VP of enrollment. So VP of enrollment holds the budget, but all the products were helping the director of financial aid. So that's who we built a relationship with. And then we started moving into building a community around those directors of financial aid. We saw things that like Gainsight was doing with customer success managers and some of these companies who are really good at building community around their product. And we were like, let's do that. So that's where the idea of student financial success came from. So we started saying like, hey, financial aid, this is the way we also tried to counterposition. We said, look, financial aid is about administering financial aid. It's about processing stuff. Student financial success is about helping students succeed. And so that touched our buyer. Our buyers were like, no one in the school sees us as being important to students being successful. They see us as an administrative cost center. And you guys came in and said like, no, the number one reason students don't graduate is financial. The number one reason students drop out of school is financial. And you, the director of financial aid, you're the hero. You're the champion of this here. And we're going to build products that help you do that. So we're going to drive student financial success, which is going to drive ultimately more degree completion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to make you the hero. And so that became the strategy, was let's make the buyer the hero. Let's give them a tool set that they've never had before. I mean, even that line, we put it on coffee mugs, "I make financial aid awesome." And I had directors of financial aid say, no one ever uses the word awesome when talking about financial aid. Like everybody hates it. It's the office no student wants to go to.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the idea of like wrapping our arms around an underserved buyer, and then using kind of the jobs to be done framework to say like, well, what are all their jobs? How can I make every job they do easier? And that's our lighthouse that we're going to build towards. And so that was the product strategy.
What's interesting is I'm seeing so many similarities and differences with other companies. So for example, here at Nectar, we often sell, most of the time we sell to HR. However, there's multiple buyers within HR we've found. And so much like the financial aid office, I assume there's probably multiple buyers within that, but you guys had great relationships with the person who holds the purse strings for everything. And
yeah,
that sounds like the key to me. I wanted to contrast this and ask you, Qualtrics got into the higher ed space, and they built basically one product and then resold that product to other departments, other buyers within the university. From the outside looking in, it helped that product become very, very sticky because you get multiple departments using this. If one wants to change and replace it, they now have to fight all these other departments. I'm curious to know, is that just because it was one product that could work really well for a bunch of different organizations?
Yeah, one is the beauty of Qualtrics in my mind was always its general applicability to any workflow. And so then it's just packaging the go-to-market messaging around a solution. But like, yeah, hey, now it's an admission solution, and now it's a scholarship application solution, and yet they didn't have to change functionality. They had to build features for that. That was all in the marketing and the messaging of the go-to-market. And that's brilliant. We actually, as we started to grow, and you get to a point, we did start having conversations about opening up our core product, the student forms product, to be the Qualtrics for education. That's actually what we said. Is we were like, we're already there, right? We're already digitizing all these workflows in financial aid. What would we need to do to open that up to the rest of the school? We got to 50 million in ARR, but my belief was to get to 100 million in ARR, we were going to have to finally grow beyond student financial success.
Because the TAM is just tapped.
Yeah, we had looked at all the interesting jobs to be done in financial aid. We had products for all of those, and so then it was okay. So there aren't going to be more schools. So some people were like, well, why don't you go international? Well, the school model is really different internationally, and distribution is a lot more expensive. So that didn't seem like a great idea. But we were like, okay, our products, and we had another product that was called Virtual Advisor. It started getting pulled outside of financial aid. They were like, well, can we use this to answer student support questions outside of financial aid? We're like, well, yeah, technically you can. You just have to train it. So yeah, if you want to do that, knock yourself out. And that's where the light bulb went off of like, well, maybe we can start to open up like Qualtrics did. But I really believe, again, coming back to, putting my VC hat on, thinking about startups, you don't want to try to boil the ocean when you're a startup. So I actually think the reason CampusLogic was so successful was because of the way we niched down and built that intimacy with the director of financial aid, built that feature set for them, built that core business that, at 50 million was both growing and pretty profitable. Like it was a solid business right then and there. Gave us the platform to then go outside. Too many startups try to do everything up front. Specifically, your GTM is just scattershot and expensive. And so you can be high growth and be efficient. You really can. You have to be smart about how you focus your energies.
I think the temptation for most people is to build something that's niche, and then as they're going to market, they haven't figured out their go-to-market motion yet, and then they're getting potential opportunities to close deal if you have X, Y, and Z, and they're like so focused on growth that they just start doing those. But then the long-term effects is that you get spread way too thin, and then you become a nothing to like, you're not something, you're everything, which is nothing to most people, and they already have a product that they like better. There is though some bundling and unbundling there, and I feel like the market flows right with where it's at. Sometimes it's in bundling and sometimes it's in unbundling mode. Right now, I feel like we're going into a bundling mode.
I think so. Like, I mean, when everybody got to the point that they were logging into 20 SaaS apps a day, it was suddenly like, okay, we're too fragmented. And then people started consolidating, people started bundling, and you start to see it move. I feel like as you go through innovation cycles, we start out with a lot of narrowly focused products because that's where it's easier to innovate, and then you bundle back up, right? And so it seems like we go back and forth every time there's a big inflection of some technology. And so yeah, I agree with you. I think you see that cycle go back and forth all the time. And I think as a product person, you have to always be thinking about where does it make sense for us to bundle and where does it make sense for us to go outside. There's no one path, truthfully, but I used to say to Greg that all plans miss something and all models are flawed. But if you know where your gaps are, you can manage around them. But the most important thing is have everybody moving in the same direction. The alignment is the really important part. When you have an agreement in the company that we're going to focus on financial aid. Then when a salesperson comes in and says, I can get Ohio State if we just agree to do this one HR form. As a startup, that's so seductive. It's so seductive to do that. You're like, we just need revenue, right?
Yeah.
And the CEO can be thinking, I just need the revenue so I can raise the next round. But a really good CEO, like Greg will say, you know what? If Ohio State doesn't see the value of the product today enough to buy it, then we'll get them later. And we're not gonna take those deviations.
Who is your biggest competitor in the space? Because most people are like, if we're not going to get them now, they're going to go with this competitor and they're going to be locked up, and then the switching cost is going to be really high.
Yeah. So again, back to my statement a minute ago, trying to pick something where there's not going to be competition, either within your segment or what you're doing in general, is really, really helpful. Our very first core product we were replacing paper and pencil and PDFs and literally fax machines. That was the alternative, what they were using.
Great competitor to have.
That was a great competitor to have. And that product then was always the flagship. Later on, we got into products that competed. And so then we were trying to position them in a way where it was like, there are other alternatives, but we're the only one doing what we're doing. Our scholarship product definitely had competitors. There were scholarship competitors, but we felt like we were doing it in a really unique way.
A lot of people, entrepreneurship is super hyped right now. It has been for the past 10 years. And many people go into college thinking, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to go build the startup, make it worth billions, sell it. But in your mind, when is the best time for somebody to start that? Or when is the most advantageous time to start and build a company where you can find some insight or wedge into the market?
Yeah. So I'm definitely biased in this regard. Because one, we only invest in B2B. I think it's really hard. It happens, but it's really hard for somebody to come right out of college and build a B2B solution because
Why is that?
You've never worked in a business. You have no real life experience around the problem. And so it's not that it's impossible. It's just a lot harder in my mind to get the insights, to come up with a new idea, and then to be able to, for example, in financial aid, there's a whole set of regulations and terminology and things that, like, if you go in to do discovery with the director of financial aid and you don't know what SAP is, you don't know what Title IV is, it's going to be hard to talk to them. One, you have no credibility with them, right? So they're going to blow you off. And two, just understanding, being able to conceptualize how everything works. So I actually think people getting some work experience is powerful to being an entrepreneur if you want to build stuff for business, for business customers. Now, if you're an entrepreneur that's like, hey, I want to start some kind of retail business, some kind of e-commerce business, or a restaurant or something that's consumer, like, yeah, I think you can do that right out of school because you can be the customer yourself, so to speak, right? But I think in a B2B context, some work experience is important. I joined my first startup at 37, and then I was like 42, and Greg was like 45 or 46 when we started CampusLogic. We were on the older side, on the more experienced side, but I think that was a benefit to us. We also had both worked for big six consulting firms. He had worked for Arthur Andersen. I had worked for EY. Methodology, process, some of this training that we had was informative to how we built the company. For company building, it was important, not necessarily for building the program.
How do you balance that with being naive to things, to where, like, most people would be like, man, all this regulation, all this stuff, it's just not worth going into this market. But some people are naive and they're like, I'm just going to go into this market and figure it out as we go. And a lot of time that's very good. How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, because you see it from a new perspective, right? And so I get that too. But the best founders that we come across are ones who experienced the problem directly themselves and then wanted to solve it. And so you have to put yourself in a place to run into the problems.
Okay, so you were at CampusLogic, you built 8 products in like 7 years. And products is a term that, I mean, people call lots of things products. Some people, some products are like big features. If we look at Rippling, they have a lot of products that to some others would just say are features. Is this mostly just a packaging and positioning thing, or did you see these things as distinct enough and separate enough that you marketed them as products, But with all these different products, did you always lead with your founding product?
We didn't, but there were probably only two or three that ended up being led with. The idea that our CRO wanted the reps to go into was go in and get to know the customer, get to do discovery, figure out what's their most pressing pain point, and map that to a product in the suite and land with that. That was her ideal. The truth is we usually landed with two or three of them, and then yes, you hoped to sell them, bundle more of them up front, but a lot of times you didn't because schools didn't have budgets for it. But so in my mind, a product, so a lot of times people call it a product because they've just packaged something on top of their existing product, or excuse me, on top of their existing application. For us, a product was supposed to be able to operate by itself, right? And also in our case, these actually all were separate applications. So these were actually separate code bases. I mean, we had a shared platform piece to it that we call platform manager that managed, common functionality like authentication, user management, integration, communications. Those were all built into this one platform manager app, and then the other products could connect to it. But they were separate code bases. Distinct projects is what I should say. They weren't really separate code bases because we reused components. So they were distinct projects.
Okay. So were they separate deployables?
Yeah, they could be.
Okay.
Yeah.
And looking back on that, was that an advantage or a disadvantage after you look back on it?
So I think it was an advantage. What it did was it gave us enough logical separation to kind of manage it as a thing, but reuse components or reuse things across the entire suite too. And so they all had the same UI UX. They all, they shared components, they shared data in a lot of cases, but yet they could be deployed individually. We weren't huge on a lot of microservices. We had seen the craziness that people had done, like just bonkers with microservices.
Too
We're
far.
like, we don't really want to do that. But the platform was modularized, right? So these were like modules that could be upgraded, deployed separately, but could also share where it made sense to share.
Gotcha.
And they all had, from a GTM perspective, they all had their own identity, right? So
Gotcha.
Like they had their own brand name, their own icon. They all had their own one pager, for lack of a better term. Like they each were, because they were solving a specific problem.
It sounds like because your competitor is oftentimes fax machine, pencil, paper, and as you got into other products, you had other competitors there. When I look at a company like Gong is still very known for their call recording. That's what they're known for. That's what they lead with still. But they have a suite of products, and they're so much more than call recording. They lead with the call recording because that's what has got them to this place. That's what they're known for. It's how people discover them.
I do see a lot of products that I think you have to have a hook, right? There's the one thing that causes people to find you, that causes you to stand out. Gong is definitely the call recording. But that's the number one reason I think of buying Gong if I'm a buyer. So that's what's positioned in the buyer's brain. So I think companies lean into those things, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Right? Truthfully, like even back to the Qualtrics example, like when you think Qualtrics, what's the number one thing you think?
Surveys.
Yeah. Now Qualtrics can do a lot more than just surveys, but and there are probably people are like, oh yeah, that's so reductionist. Just call it a survey tool. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. But at the end of the day, that's what draws the buyer's attention. And you have to stand out in the crowd because there's so many solutions out there. I mean, Gong's in the GTM space is probably the most crowded market there is GTM tech. There's all these tools there. So you have to have something the customer's like, oh yeah, if I buy Gong, I get this, and that's something that I want. So I get that.
Okay, I want you to take me through, after you've built these products, you're at 50 million ARR. How does the process of CampusLogic getting acquired go? Take us through that story.
Oh, yeah. We were watching the marketplace, and there were some things happening in the marketplace that gave us some concern. So we started worrying about our market a little bit. Higher ed was going through a big shift in demographics where there are fewer students. So we're like, how's that going to impact them? There was also financial aid is tied to politics, and there was some political stuff going on that we were like, that, we might face some headwinds. So we're like, okay. And then truthfully, there was just a really big opportunity, a large strategic in the space that we always thought was a potential acquirer. Traded hands from, I forget who was in them before, but Blackstone and Vista bought into them. And Greg was very savvy. He said, well, what's going to be number one in their playbook is acquisitions after they do this. So he said, so he went to the board and he said, look, they're going to be in market. We've got this great asset and we have these market concerns. Should we take a look at it? And the board said, yeah, that seems prudent. Yeah, if another financial sponsor had come along, we might have done that also. We did kind of went out and ran the process to see what the options were. But if it had been another financial sponsor, another private equity or something, then there probably would have been some M&A involved in that too. So the entity would have changed. The strategic allowed, for the real exit, and while we loved what we were doing, after 10, 11 years, there is some fatigue that starts in a little bit.
Yeah.
And you start to think that maybe there should be some new energy. But that was really kind of a confluence of events there, of like changes in the marketplace. Our metrics were great at the time, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, what was your profile?
Yeah, our profile, was roughly, like I said, we were approaching 50. We were profitable. We were over a 50 on Rule of 40. We had gross retention in the 90s, net retention around 110. Like we had good numbers.
Yeah, it's a solid profile.
Yeah, it was a good profile. But then also because you're in a smaller vertical, there are only so many buyers in the vertical. So you don't know when there's going to be somebody in market shopping again too. Like that was part of the calculus a little bit, was like, hey, this company, Ellucian, is probably going to be in market shopping. The other big buyers aren't necessarily shopping right now, and maybe they won't for a while. If higher ed goes through this kind of headwind phase, maybe the M&A market is going to be cold. So Ellucian,
They were the company that eventually bought you. What did they do, and how did your product fit within what they were doing?
Yeah, so they ironically were the student information system company that at Top School I was trying to displace.
Okay.
So they were the established market leader in student information systems. They have more schools than anybody else in the country, and they're international. They probably do about $1.5 billion. They've been around 50 years. Yeah, they're the granddaddy in the space. So we just gave them a way to have some products that were more growth oriented. But the student information system space is pretty saturated. It's not a high growth market. So this gave them a growth vector, synergistic with their products. And then also their CEO was very interested in bringing in some entrepreneurial blood.
What year was this that you guys did the deal?
Deal closed on New Year's Eve, 2021.
So had Greg had a relationship that he had been building for years with this company, or did it happen quickly?
Yeah, no. So we knew the CEO there. We had several conversations with them. We were a member of their partner program. Yeah, so we had built a relationship over several years. Greg was always really good at always building pipeline for fundraising or acquisition.
That's what a good CEO does.
Yeah, he was always cultivating those relationships so that he had options.
So the acquisition happens. You end up leaving after what, less than a year?
So I made it 3 months post-close.
Couldn't handle that corporate life, huh?
It turns out I'm not a very good employee. Yeah.
So you made it 3 months. Greg had already left the business.
Technically, no. They had him in a strategic advisor type role. But he had already started building Phoenix Ventures. Then once we signed the deal for the company, then he started focusing on that more. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. The original plan was, the original plan was I was going to stay. Like Greg had promoted me to president, so it was totally positioned during the deal of like Greg's gonna move on and Chumley will stay for the transition. And maybe for the long haul. I mean, I had spent most of my career in higher ed, and and this is the biggest higher ed tech company in the market. So I went in thinking maybe this will be my home going forward. But I now have lots of thoughts for founding teams when they get acquired.
So 3 months, and then And then was it instantly you jumped over to Phoenix Ventures, or was there a gap there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Greg, when they decided they were gonna part ways with me, they actually had Greg come tell me. And so Greg came in, he told me this, and he said, I know you're probably disappointed, um, a little bit. He says it never feels good when it's someone else's decision, but this is like Christmas for me because now I can hire you without any non-compete, non-solicit stuff. And I was like, well, that's great. I said, but Greg, it's been 10 years since I've been a free agent. I feel like I should at least test the waters. So I didn't accept a job with him right away. I talked to a few other people, looked at a couple other opportunities, but then came back. And the ultimate decision, my wife even said this to me. She said, you have this relationship with Greg, and Greg is going to be successful no matter what he does. And she said, most people spend their whole life trying to find that business partner. She's like, why would you walk away from that? And I was like, yeah, you're right. You're right. So I called him up and I was like, yeah, I'm on board. But yeah, this ride with him has been pretty great. There's no better person to work with.
As you joined Phoenix Ventures, what's kind of been your role in the company?
Yeah, that's evolved a little bit too. At first, we thought we were going to run a venture studio, which again, as a product person, sounded great to me. I was like, oh yeah, so I'm just going to spin up stuff, build stuff. This will be great. And so we did a few of those, and for a lot of reasons, that's a really hard model to make work. And so we kind of backed away from that. And so then I was leading our pre-seed investments, which we did a bunch of those. And then as we've kind of figured out our identity, we've found that we're definitely more interested in investing in at the seed stage rather than the pre-seed. And actually think that pre-seed with AI now is really hard to figure out, especially if you're going to have a regional focus like we do. It's just a really hard model to make work. I've even seen some people say like, yeah, pre-seed investing is now completely foolish to even participate in because it's never been easier to build an application. Like that used to be a barrier to getting a startup off the ground was building it. Well, now you can build it easy. The GTM and getting to revenue and getting traction and getting retention, that's actually now the thing that you're looking for as an investor. And so we're now investing more between 500K and $1 million in ARR. We want to see some proof points. I'm sure there are still investors who invest in ideas. I tell people all the time, I don't invest in napkins. I don't invest in ideas. We invest in burgeoning businesses. And so we want to see some business building happen. Even if it's founder-led sales, even if it's still selling within your network, we want to see a little bit of traction before we invest now. So that's what our core fund was raised to do. And so that's what we focus on.
Yeah. Okay. So you previously said like, I don't really believe in like the one person. I don't think Steve Jobs maybe he was a catalyst, but he wasn't the genius that built Apple by himself. And companies are built between lots of people. It's very much a team sport. As you go into investing, many people are evaluating the founder and saying, I'm investing in this person. Are you and as Phoenix Ventures, are they often investing in the person, or is it so much like, I just want to see the business, give me the numbers? Like how much does the person influence the investment?
The person is really important at this stage because what you're trying to underwrite is that person's growth. Trevor is a much different CEO now than when we invested in Nectar. He's grown a lot, right? And so that's actually what we're looking for a lot is because we know that the job of the CEO is going to change over time. And the things that the founder has to be good at is learning and growing, has to be really good at being able to bring people together and put a team around them, because like I said, it's a team sport, but at the seed stage, you don't have the full leadership team even built out usually, normally the founder's still doing all the sales or the founder's still the product person, and so it's not so much like that there's a team we can invest in, but we have to invest in the ability and our belief that the CEO can build it, the founder can build the team.
How do you gain that belief?
Spending time with them a lot of times. Definitely you look at some of their past experience, but a lot of it is conversations with them where we push them to talk about the future and how they would go about hiring people, how they see their team looking, like how they would put them together. Maybe one of the biggest things is trying to gauge, are they good at seeing where they have gaps? Are they self-aware enough to say like, well, I actually know that I'm really good at sales, but I really don't know how to build a product. And if I stay involved build crap because I'll build whatever any customer asks for? Are they aware enough of that? Or if they're like, you know what, I'm a big picture person. I really need a strong CFO who can run the financial operations because I'm not very good with spreadsheets. Really good CEOs figure out how to leverage themselves by getting somebody better at certain things and then figuring out what is it that I really add that's unique. They can build around that.
Company building has changed a ton in just the past 2-3 years with AI coming on the scene.
Last 3
How
months.
has that? Yeah, in the last 3 months, how do you work through that? I mean, it's got to muddy the waters a ton, but is it still just going back to the same principles, or do you have to evolve in your thinking?
No, I think we evolve our thinking all the time too. So, I would say the number one thing that I have found that I didn't anticipate in moving over to being an investor versus an operator is this job's all about learning. It's all about studying. And so, we spend a lot of time talking to our portfolios about what they're doing, what they're seeing. We're consuming all the content that I'm sure most of the founders are too. And then we have a lot of internal discussions where then we're trying to filter that through our experience. Because some of the company building, things that people are talking about now, the new way to build companies, we're kind of like, we don't believe that.
What are some examples?
Well, okay. So this is going to be my own little rant, but like vibe coding has driven me crazy. Like the idea that, we're not going to need engineering anymore. I'm like, that's just stupid. That's not true. Now, do I see roles collapsing? Yes. Do I see people doing it with fewer people? Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of what we're seeing is the old benchmarks, head count and where you're spending capital is changing. But, I still believe you're still going to have somebody driving the direction of the product. You're going to have somebody who's driving the technology of the product. Then you're still going to have, a team. That team may be smaller. I think the people most in danger are pure designers. Like I think they're the ones that are going to have to expand their scope and their breadth. I think we're going to see, more full stack product type people who are, doing everything from discovery to building prototypes with vibe code, and everything in between. So I think you're going to see a lot more generalists in company building, and your revenue per FTE should be much higher than it used to be at a sooner stage. Profitability should probably happen sooner than it used to. Those types of things we're seeing for sure. But yeah, we're learning at the same time everybody else is. Is my quick answer is that we just try to stay on top of what everybody's doing and then bounce that off of our portfolio and then bounce that off of our own experience.
Yeah. I mean, the vibe coding, all the AI stuff is very, very interesting. Just in the past month, I feel like things have taken a massive turn. I mean, especially for us, we're going faster than ever. We're using agents more than we ever have. Things just got a lot better. And it's really exciting and slightly scary for people. And they're like, well, man, if headcount's going to be smaller at all these companies, is headcount going to be smaller at my company? And I generally am optimistic on we're going to become more productive, so we're going to do more. And people compare it to past innovations. It's like, okay, we can all make our own bread, but are we making our own bread or are we buying our bread? And we're all buying our bread. Not a lot of us are making our own bread. However, my thought goes to, well, are there as many bread companies, and are those bread companies worth more or less than they used to be? So when we take software companies, there's a lot of software companies, and a lot of them could be worth a lot of money. Do their valuations come down, and do there become less software companies because those software companies are producing more and more? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a big one to unpack. One is back to the idea that we're all producing more than we've ever produced before. I do think that it used to be that speed was the best differentiator, right? The fastest team won. I think the competition vector is going to change now. You can build tons of stuff now and you can build it really fast. Now being able to build stuff that has impact, figuring out what to build. If anything, it excites me as a product person because I think the product manager type person is more important than ever before because now it's no longer a barrier of like, oh, how long will it take engineering to build this? Yeah, no, we can build this right away, but is it worth it? Is it going to make a difference? Like being impactful is going to be where the great companies are going to win because they're going to build the right thing, not just build fast. As far as the market for software, this has been a conversation I've had with a lot of founders who are getting worried. Early stage founders who are worried. They're like, am I building something that's not even worth any money? I agree with you. Just because I can build the SaaS apps I'm using, do I want to? Why don't I take this capacity and this tooling that AI has made possible, and why don't I point that at my core business, right? So, if I'm desk booking software, okay, and a customer is using me, like, yes, could they vibe code my solution, in a weekend or a couple of days? Yeah, they probably could. But will they spend that attention on that problem? Should they be putting that attention on that problem? You've solved that problem for them. It's like, why wouldn't they put that attention on the core of their business, is what I think will happen in the enterprise. So I think there will still be commercial enterprise software. So I agree with your bread analogy completely. The difference may be that pricing power for software is going to get harder. And then, by the way, I've seen this in the past. I'm old enough to remember when companies were paying Ernst & Young to build them a website for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And no lie, in the 90s, people were paying millions of dollars to build their website. Okay. And not because it was that hard, it was because they just didn't have the know-how, right? So the people who had the know-how, the knowledge, could monetize. If it's easier and easier to build software and there's more and more competitors, you're going to lose pricing power. I do think it's going to be harder to extract the same value for software that you could in the past, which of course will then actually, impact the economic value of software long run. I do think it will be harder. There'll be fewer winners and big outcomes, I think, in the future in software than there have been in the past.
Yeah.
But I'm still an optimist about ingenuity and creativity, and that we're gonna move to problems now that we never tried to solve.
So as a venture capitalist, if there are fewer winners than there have been in the past, that makes your job a whole lot harder of figuring out
Yep.
which companies to invest in. Do you invest in more companies so that you hit a winner, or do you take more time to look at companies and make more selective bets?
Yeah, probably both. And there are different strategies there on that too. In the last couple investments that we've done, we're looking for high complexity. Are you doing something that have you tackled a problem that's really kind of painful to go after? By the way, that's also ingrained in us. Financial aid was something that most people didn't want to go learn. We just invested in a company that uses AI to deliver quotes in contract manufacturing. So, like, the AI has to understand the bill of materials from a spec, and it has to then source from suppliers what the components will cost, and it generates a quote. Something that used to take engineers a month to 6 weeks to get a quote back. Now with this tool, you can get a quote back in a couple of days, right? Because it's that quote cycle significantly. They ran into a lot of technical challenges in doing that, right? The way they chunked and processed the quote into the AI, but just the very nature of going in and understanding that domain is a little bit of a moat itself, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a simple SaaS product, a simple workflow, a simple survey tool, then it might be hard to win. But I still think that solving really complex problems is still investable.
Yeah.
So that's
interesting.
what we're looking for the.
Do you think private equity makes a bigger presence in software over time?
Well, I mean, people are already making the statement that VC is looking more and more like private equity all the time. So yeah, I think the venture world is changing. I think one of the great things about investing, one of the great things about technology, is both are fields that are constantly evolving, reinventing, a lot of disruption. I've been through several disruptions. I went through the dot-com boom. I went through the move to cloud and mobile. Now I'm going through AI. It's actually gotten easier and easier to build software. At top school, we had to buy hardware. We had to rack it. We had to plan capacity, but there weren't as many like libraries and frameworks for building software that there are today, even before AI. Like it's my whole career, it's gotten easier and easier to build software, but we keep building new and interesting things.
What's the best book you've read recently that you would recommend to others?
So I'm finishing a book right now called The Strategic Enemy, and it's about a product positioning and branding, which I think is going to be where people are going to differentiate more. in the future.
Okay. What do you think is the most underrated business skill?
Most underrated business skill is becoming, I think, writing, because everybody
Interesting.
outsources it to AI. I think we talk all the time about the fact that people are outsourcing writing to AI, and writing something is the best way to clarify your thinking. And so I think people who still write are going to be the best strategic thinkers.
What's a daily habit that you have that makes you better at your job?
I always think it's the few minutes that I spend each morning planning my day, assessing my day, planning my day, rethinking my day. Usually like throwing my to-do list away and starting over.
Why is that? Why does that help you?
I just clear out all the clutter and all the stuff that didn't really need to be done.
Okay.
You know me, I'm a real big like every day reprioritize.
Yeah, funny how that works. So what did you change your mind about recently?
This was actually the hardest question. Like, what if I changed my mind about recently? I did change my mind. I did change my mind about whether you could build an app with AI, because someone showed me one. I recently had a founder come bring me something that they did over a weekend, and every question I said, well, but what about this? What about that? It did it. And I was like, this was a non-technical guy who built a whole application over a weekend. They had things like e-signature built into it, had API connections in it, had barcode reading in it. And I was like, wow, okay, this is more than a prototype. This is actually something usable. Now, whether it's scalable and can be supported and whether it'll be successful like that, I don't know. But I had to change my mind on whether you could build something.
You don't change your mind easily, so that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, this exactly.
All right, Chris. Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. I think that's the pod.
Anytime.
We basically said, what's our whole process from product manager gathering feedback all the way to from design requirements, building, shipping. Let's take that whole process and let's figure it out. And where can we use it? We didn't take the big idea of like, how can we just automate this whole thing with AI? We just took little chunks and said, how can we use AI to like speed this part up and this part up? And we've done that. And I feel like the gains have been incredible. The product managers have Cloud Code. The engineers have Cloud Code. People in DevOps, everyone has Cloud Code. The product managers we're using Linear's MCP to connect Cloud Code with that. But we create a ticket in Linear. We then pull that ticket in with Cloud Code and we say, okay, let's plan this out as a product manager. Product manager plans it out with Claude. Okay, let's put that information into the ticket. It puts that information into the ticket. The engineer then takes the ticket, has Claude take the ticket, and we run these shortcuts or these commands where it's like, hey, enrich this ticket. And it goes and looks at the ticket, and then it starts asking questions and adding things that it might need. And then we have another command that's like, okay, now go technically design this ticket. And it goes through and looks at the ticket, looks at our code base and says, okay, based on the way you got the code base structured, this is how you should do it. And that's really helpful for the next agent to pick up. We found that if an agent writes another agent's instructions, the agent who's actually doing the work will do very well at that work.
Will do better. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you say, okay, agent, or oftentimes we break them up into much smaller tickets. We have the agents help us do that. And then we tell the agents, okay, now pick up this ticket and do it. And it will do it. And then we have another agent that reviews it. And we have all these rules for how to review it. And then it's like, okay, let's make a merge request and let's get it out there. And obviously humans are still in the loop for so many pieces of that, but holy cow, it is sped up a ton. And we're going to go really, really fast because of it. And it's very exciting.
Yeah. So there definitely seems to be something that's inflected with Claude Code in particular. Like,
and
Claude is
Claude Code in particular, because like Cursor can do a bunch of stuff and it can still use Claude Opus, but it's not as good as the Claude Code stuff. And I am not technical enough to put my finger on all the reasons why, but our engineers are like, I don't want Cursor anymore. I want Claude Code, it's just crazy. And I'm sure Anthropic's revenue has shot up over the past 2 months.
Yeah. Well, and you see, and that's what's crazy is not that it's going to go to zero, but like, so Cursor is literally in the hundreds of millions in ARR and at risk. Right?
Yeah. Which is crazy to think about.
That's the crazy thing for an investor right now is like, yeah, like it used to be like, you get past, they used to say like, if you can get to 10 million in ARR, you can get to 100, then it's just a matter of just continuing to grind. No,
because
longer.
you've built that muscle. You know how to do
Yeah.
that. And it's like
Yeah.
the companies who go up really fast, I feel like they have no muscles for how to replicate that. The product is insane. The product is amazing, but there's no muscles to continue building a business. And so if the product takes a turn or gets behind, you can lose that revenue, in my mind, just as fast as you got it. Now, like you said, probably not going to go to zero, but there are so many vibe coding apps out there that I'm like, who's going to win? And I don't know if the market's big enough for all of them. I don't know. It's just thoughts that I have. But
Yeah. No, that space is intriguing too. And, in general, because of the different products and what they're doing. But it does seem like with Claude Code and it's more agentic than Cursor. Cursor is more of like an augmentation for the engineer. The engineer is still like leading the work. Whereas it feels like more with Claude, it's like, okay, I'm going to send this because been building some internal stuff for us. We're building a tool that's going to map all of our network and then our secondary networks to find founders. So he's scraping LinkedIn and then he's doing some stuff, and he's doing it all with Claude Code.
yeah,
And so it's literally like he's like, yeah, like he kicks it off and he lets it run for a while and then he comes back. He said it's like having a team. He's like, engineers are all now managers, is what they are. They're now like managing and reviewing and
yes,
not coding.
yeah. Which I feel like it wasn't as good 4 months ago, but now it is that good. And Cloud Code specifically is very good at not taking shortcuts, coming back and asking you questions, not forgetting things. Whereas Cursor, you can tell it to do the same thing and it will plan it out and it will start doing things. And then it'll start to get lazy over time and just take shortcuts. And you're like, wait, no, don't do that. Where Cloud Code doesn't get lazy, it's like, okay, this is the next step. Let's plan this out. Let's talk about this. Is this what we should be doing? And it keeps you more in that loop, which I think is really good.
Yeah.
But it's going to be very interesting how things evolve. Yeah,
That's crazy.
we've got big ambitions now.
My bigger worry about AI is also just this big picture, like kind of existential. When AI is doing all this work and doing all this grunt work, how does anybody learn?
Yeah.
How does someone become a partner at a law firm without being an associate? Like Greg and Jeff were looking at some now agent that works in Excel that they're like, it can do our associate's job. But if she doesn't work here for several years as an associate, how does she ever become?
Yeah. That is an interesting
But
question.
you know what I'm saying is like it's also like my answer on thinking and writing. We've messed around with having AI write our investment memos. And it's like, well, great. So it saves time on getting to an investment memo, and the investment memo seems pretty good. But is the value of the investment memo the deliverable, or was it the thinking that went into developing it? Because we now turn that thinking over to the AI. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we got so focused on like, well, let's just get to the outcome, which is the set of deliverables. This report, or this analysis, this user story. But it's like, but we had deliverables like that in the past to capture our thinking. You know what I mean? Like, is there anyway? I don't know. And if you have kids,
I wonder.
how do you tell your kids? My sons that are at BYU, I have no idea what to do for a career or to study,
Yeah.
because I'm like, I don't know.
My general thoughts are we spent a lot of time thinking, and there were some deliverables that were to help that thinking, but there was a lot of other just tasks that we were doing that took away from thinking. And if those tasks are more automated, then we can spend more time thinking, that higher order of work, right?
Hopefully,
We can spend more time thinking to make the right decision. And that's my optimistic take on it. But it'll be interesting to see where everything
I
goes.
mean, right now,
It's
engineers,
wild.
it is totally wild. But but you think even like Brian, right? Like Brian can manage the agents because he has hand coded for years.
Yes.
But we're going to end up one generation from now with engineers who haven't actually hand coded. So then, how do they become engineers? That's where I'm worried. And then I'm more skeptical because you hear these crazies out in Silicon Valley talk about like, well, then we won't need money anymore. We won't need jobs
Yeah.
anymore. And I'm like, and you know what happens when that happens? Society will fall apart. If human beings aren't anxiously engaged in a good cause, we will have nothing but negative outcomes. I'm sorry. I'm not optimistic about human beings.
That's true. That's a fair point. Yeah. I don't know.